BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of Astro Psych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody is well. Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we truly begin. And the first is, there is a new set of episodes available here on Black Box Online Radio in the YouTube Shorts section. Yes, they are released as 1-minute true crime book reviews one more time on the YouTube Shorts page. And for the near future, in the near future, rather, I'm going to be putting out a new piece of writing. Right now, I'm just assembling a lot of the notes and observations that I've made about true crime cases over the past several years. I've been doing this show for 6 years now, and it wasn't always focused on true crime or serial killers, but I've noticed certain patterns and trends and similarities in human behavior, and I'm trying to document and assemble them. But I also want to provide the condition that I am not a medical doctor or psychologist of any sort. I'm just some guy that watches YouTube videos, reads books, and listens to podcasts and interviews, and just sharing it from the perspective of someone who is a follower of this content, just someone sitting at home learning about this stuff like anybody else. So when I discuss the psychology of somebody like Ted Bundy, who is the subject of today's episode, I just want to keep that in mind. And also, sometimes professional psychologists tune into the show and they give their feedback in the comments section down below. That is welcome. And I also invite anybody else to share something. Those are just great ways to support the channel. Hit the like button, subscribe, write your idea in the comment section down below. But you can also go over to BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88. There's a link to that in the description box. BuyMeACoffee.com allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. So, in this episode, I'll be discussing the case of Ted Bundy, who is perhaps the most famous serial killer in America, or even if you don't accept that, if you were to just walk up to a random person, and it doesn't matter what country you're in, America, England, and you were to ask them to name 5 serial killers off the top of their head, they probably would say Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, Jack the Ripper, the Zodiac Killer, and Ted Bundy. He definitely would be in the top 5 of the ones that people would think about immediately. And there are going to be several reasons for that will be discussed throughout the duration of this episode. Ted Bundy was also known as the Lady Killer, and he targeted women, females exclusively. Some of his victims were definitely on the younger side and definitely would be classified as girls as opposed to women. Ted Bundy killed by blunt force, and he also, at some times, dismembered the bodies. He also was a necrophiliac, having sex with the bodies. Very, very grotesque and disturbing things. But I think what fascinates people about Ted Bundy's case is that he came across as someone who was attractive and charming and well-spoken and intelligent, and he had so much in his normal life. He had so many capabilities in his normal life, yet he chose to become a serial killer. And when you look at the life story of Ted Bundy, there are a few immediate markers that stand out. One of them is that he learned that he was living a lie. His biological mother was living the role of his sister, and there's a story that was shared in a couple different places I have found some conflicting information. There is a documentary that is out that's about 1 hour and 20 minutes long on the YouTube channel KKG 108 that stated that Ted Bundy's biological father was his own grandfather, that his grandfather had raped Ted Bundy's mother, and so that he was both her son and her brother, and that's why they were having him live in this charade, thinking that this woman is just his sister, but in reality she's his mother. But when I was listening to the serial killer podcast hosted by Thomas Viborg Thune, he shared something about how that is more or less just speculation, or people have put two and two together, and that it's not exactly an established fact. But what is an established fact is that Ted Bundy did learn that he was living this lie. And there is a four-part series on the Serial Killer podcast, as I said, once again, hosted by Thomas Viborg Thune. And those episodes are available here on YouTube, actually. The Serial Killer podcast is on Podcast One, but you can listen on YouTube. And that one also contains an interview with Dr. Al Carlisle, who is the author of the book Violent Mind and one of the psychologists who interviewed Ted Bundy. And one question that came up was, at what age exactly did Ted Bundy learn that his sister was actually his mother? And the answer was, it's not 100% known as a certifiable fact when, but as I understand it, he would have been in his later, around late teens, maybe even bordering the age of 20. But at that point, I mean, we're talking about more than a decade, almost 2 decades, he learned that he had been living a lie. And this affects people's psychology. It affects people because when you find out that your parents are lying to you and there are these dark family secrets, the parents are the people who are supposed to keep the child safe, and it affects the way the brain functions, and it can create emotional trauma. And that's what all of the sources that I've just cited have said about Ted Bundy, is that he had this fascination with women, he had this intense desire to be with women, but partnered with this emotional trauma, he chose to try and dominate women in a very destructive way. Absolutely terrible. Absolutely wrong. And this is just trying to explain the mechanics of how this type of thinking is working. But when he felt betrayed by, well, his mother, and then he goes on to become a serial killer that targets women, that is definitely an influence. But it is not the only influence on the psychology of somebody like Ted Bundy. For example, Ted Bundy was also very much involved with pornography. And they say this about everybody who watches pornography. I haven't experienced it too much firsthand, but that slowly over time you have to watch things that are more and more intense. Like, I think it's more relevant to people who masturbate while they're looking at the pornography. Like, to achieve ejaculation, they have to watch more and more intense types of porn. Like, there'll just be a man and a woman in one, and then they would need to watch a man and 2 women having the threesome, and then they need to watch the bondage porn or something with whips and chains. They have to watch things that will increase the stimulation, that will fuel the excitement. And with somebody like Ted Bundy, this again isn't something that we can say as mind readers, but it's highly possible that he was developing this type of imaginary lifestyle where he is thinking about doing very, very harmful things to women, purely in the terms of dark fantasy, purely in the terms of the mind, and he's doing that for years and years and years, and then he decides to start living them out. So that also seems to make sense. Pornography, being betrayed by his mother, and some other points that have been shared in all of the sources, once again, are in agreement that Ted Bundy was the victim of bullying. And Thomas Thune shared something that I think needs to be reiterated. He said that lots of serial killers are the victims of bullying, but that is absolutely no justification for the wrongdoings that they commit. But it's a common characteristic. I mean, Joel Rifkin, the serial killer, was also a major victim of bullying. And I even thought of Robert Christian Hansen, the Alaskan serial killer called the Butcher Baker. He had a stutter that he was bullied for. And when people feel ostracized and excluded from the group and alienated, and they develop a type of resentment towards certain members of society. And some serial killers go on to commit their crimes because of sexual urges. Ted Bundy would be one of them, and then there are other serial killers who go on to commit the crimes because of more calculated reasons. They're not trying to fuel an urge, they just simply want revenge on certain people. But some other characteristics that were shared about Ted Bundy's childhood were that he was very skinny, and he was bullied for just being skinny and not looking strong and not able to fight back. And even as young as his junior high years, he began to try and surpass that by dressing in a very nice way, even like over the top dressing, even being too fancy for a junior high school, but it was a way to compensate for his skinny frame, even though he was also bullied for that to a certain extent. But Ted Bundy, I think almost everyone can agree, was a very intelligent person, and as previously stated, he's somebody who had a lot of capabilities. He wanted to be a lawyer, he wanted to be a politician, and perhaps he could have gone through with his plans to become a lawyer, except he was involved with an enormous amount of criminal deviance, being a peeping Tom, stealing, and let alone some of the crimes against women that went on before he truly took things to the level of murder. So then you have deviant behavior that is escalating, partnered with fantasies of more or less torturing women that are escalating, and all of this is just driving somebody to become a killer. But with Bundy, I mean, what so many of us wonder is, why wasn't it enough? Why wasn't it enough to just become a lawyer and become this type of well-dressed, well-spoken person in the courtroom? He could have just done that. And that's something that is so frustrating about the story of Ted Bundy, because he could have always walked away from this path of criminal behavior, but he chose not to. He actively and specifically chose not to. With Ted Bundy, you have all of these types of dark, twisted fantasies partnered with, most importantly, emotional trauma from his childhood, and this ability to manipulate and gain control of people because he just comes across as this non-threatening but well-spoken person. You will find this all the time when people are talking about serial killers. They are presented as extremely non-threatening people. Last week on the Anything Goes Friday segment, I was talking about the serial killer Albert Fish, who was known as the Moon Maniac. And one way that he was able to get away with his crimes for so long was he was an older man committing crimes. And they just thought, well, this guy's such a harmless old man. He looks like somebody's grandpa. There's no way that he's actually hurting children and such. And Albert Fish was a way more vicious serial killer than Ted Bundy, but it's the same concept of he's giving the non-threatening impression. He's coming across as a non-threatening individual. John Aykroyd, the subject of the documentary Ghosts of Highway 20, was another serial killer who abducted a woman, and she was able to get away. But she just said there was not a single threatening thing about him. You will find this type of behavior in serial killers all the time. Moses Sotole, another serial killer from Africa, had that same charming ability. He's almost like the African Ted Bundy, the well-dressed person who can lure women to odd places. And there is somebody whom I haven't spoken too highly of on the channel. His name is Lyndon Lafferty. He wrote a book about the Zodiac Killer, but he did say an insightful statement once in an interview when he said, certain serial killers have the ability to get a woman to go somewhere with them, and they wouldn't normally go there with another man, but this person puts them in a false sense of comfort, a false sense of ease, and then they act on a type of murderous urge, and that would be Ted Bundy, I think, to a T. Ted Bundy had a very famous set of stories where he would wear a fake plaster cast, and he would walk up to a woman and say that he needs help with his boat, and that he needs her to help do something. He can't tie something up, or he can't move something because of his broken arm, and he would use that as a way to lure her into an area where he had access to her. Ted Bundy is also somebody who committed a sorority house massacre, going after multiple women in one night, and when I was watching that stuff in the documentaries, I'd heard that story before, but recently on the channel I also talked about Richard Speck, who committed the South Chicago massacre, murdering 8 student nurses in the student nurses' dorm townhouse, and sometimes it's called the Townhouse Massacre. Very similar as well, but with Richard Speck, He wanted to commit an enormous amount of destruction. He wanted to be a mass murderer and then kill himself. He attempted suicide shortly after. With Ted Bundy, it appeared that he just wanted to keep on living in the types of destructive and heinous lifestyles because it's just going back and forth between that murderous mind and then just the glib and superficial smooth talker. And that is a very big characteristic of psychopaths. Well, if you look at the hair checklist, the 20-item checklist that is used to diagnose psychopathy, or sociopathy even, glib and superficial charm is one of the major components of that. It's the one that everybody is going to be remembering. And with Ted Bundy, to a certain extent, you can see how there's this type of glib and superficial charm about him. But I think, and this is on a personal level, once you realize that Ted Bundy was a serial killer, the charm goes away. He's not some just articulate guy, and he's not some type of guy wearing a blazer jacket. No, he's a murderer. He's a scumbag. He was wrong. What he did was immoral. What he did was disgusting. He cut women's bodies apart, and he had sex with them. He is an absolutely evil person, if I can just share a personal note there. And that is something that does need to be shared as well, because when we talk about serial killers, we want to know what drives this person to kill. How does human psychology function? And there is this certain quest to understand all aspects of human behavior, but absolutely not with glorification. Absolutely, we do not want to glorify, praise, romanticize, or even enjoy anything about the serial killers. These people are wrong. They know that they're doing things that are wrong. And with Ted Bundy, though, you can see very clearly that he had awareness of what he was doing. And I mean, this is something that Al Carlisle did share as well. He was not a clinical psychotic to the point where he's not aware of what's happening during these crimes. This is all calculated. And there was a quotation that was shared on the Serial Killer podcast from Anne Rule, who perhaps wrote the most famous book about Ted Bundy. It's called The Stranger Beside Me. And she said that he was, that the doctors had examined Ted Bundy and determined that he was not neurotic, like the personality trait of neuroticism, worrying, repetitive thinking, and so on. But again, in my own unprofessional opinion, as I understand with neurotic serial killers, they go to certain lengths to cover up their crimes, as a serial killer who is really low in neuroticism will not. Like, for example, the Zodiac killer who murdered people and just left the bodies where they were and walked away. Ted Bundy went to great lengths to cover up his crimes and to hide the bodies and such. And, I mean, if you do listen to the Serial Killer podcast, there is, a set of stories in there that you often just have to wonder, well, where are these sources coming from? But there's one that Ted Bundy cut off the heads of several victims and then deposited the heads in different parts of a state by actually just carrying the heads around in a sack. Now, maybe that's completely true. Maybe it's not. As I said, I heard it on the Serial Killer podcast. I mean, if that is true, that's just another example of viciousness, or as Al Carlisle said, the violent mind. But a point from Al Carlisle, though, that was shared was actually presented as a challenge question, and I love challenge questions. And they were asking him, was Ted Bundy a clinical psychopath? And Al Carlisle had a very odd response as a clinical psychologist, and he said, when we look at a psychopath, we're only looking at the end result. I mean, would we really be able to know, was he a psychopath his entire life? And I thought that was an odd response. But I understood what he was saying completely, because psychopathy, like being a psychopath, means you're born with it, and sociopathy means that the social surroundings have affected this person's mental state, so they now have the psychopathic traits. As I said, psychopathy is diagnosed using the hair checklist. It is a 20-item checklist with the scores of 0, 1, or 2 for each point. Therefore, the maximum score is 40. If you get 30 out of 40, then you are a psychopath, and it's done by, of course, an expert examiner. And I understand what he's talking about, but at the same time, I mean, just looking at the end result leaves it completely open that Ted Bundy could have been a born psychopath, and somebody who perhaps was Charles Manson, even though he went on to live a life of crime. When I did the episode The Neuroscience of Serial Killers here on this channel, I was talking to just that, a neuroscientist, and they said when they examined Charles Manson's brain, his neurotransmitters were practically functioning backwards. Now, both Charles Manson and Ted Bundy are incorporated into something called the hierarchy of evil that was devised by Dr. Michael Stone, and it rates the level of more or less brutality. I think that's really what it should be, the hierarchy of brutality as opposed to the hierarchy of evil. Charles Manson was listed as level 16. Ted Bundy was listed as level 17, a sexually motivated serial killer. There are 22 levels of the hierarchy of evil. Level 22 is where you would find John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and almost certainly Albert Fish. There are the psychopathic torture murderers, the people who tortured their victims to death. Again, Ted Bundy's only at level 17. He is killing people, and then he's doing things to the bodies post-mortem, but perhaps not torturing them to death or using torture as a way to kill the person. Interestingly, though, on the hierarchy of evil, level 21, the second highest, is only about psychopathic torturers, people who are torturing to fuel their own excitement, and murder is not even necessary to get to that level. And I think the focus of the hierarchy of evil is to show that torture is something that is viewed as more vicious and more brutal than simply committing the act of murder, and I absolutely agree with that. Ted Bundy, though, is somebody who is also fueled by a certain sense of revenge. There is a woman in his life who affected a lot of his certain desires in terms of victim profiling, and her, as I have gathered from the sources, her name has not truly been revealed, and her name is Stephanie Brooks. That is a pseudonym that has been attributed to her. As I've gathered from the sources, she did not have her real name revealed because she was not a suspect in anything associated with the crimes, therefore she had a right to privacy. And she was the woman that Ted Bundy wanted to be with, but ultimately she ended up leaving him. And there was a very interesting fact about her that she would always keep her hair long and part it in the middle. And when you look at the photos of Ted Bundy's victims, you can also see that he targeted women who had their hair long and parted in the middle. It really is quite shocking how similar some of his victims look, but there's a very particular type of desire that he had, and he actually is able to get his life together to the point where he is succeeding as someone involved in the political scene. He is an up-and-comer in life, and he gets Stephanie Brooks to want him back, but then he turns around and dumps her and rejects her. And that's another point on the list. We just got to make a tally list. What kind of reason would Ted Bundy have to keep going on killing? He's done everything that the average person would not be able to do. Okay, he got his heart broken by a woman. All right, well, now he asked her to take him back. She said yes. He's like, just kidding, I don't want you back anymore. Okay, those words didn't actually happen, but he got his revenge. Why wasn't that enough? And when you hear all these things about Ted Bundy, about how he liked skiing, he liked the outdoors and hiking, and he had a real life career ahead of him, why did he have to give all that up? He could have done so many things that the ordinary average person wanted to do, but they chose not to. And some people think that this type of fascination that people have with Ted Bundy, why he's one of the most famous serial killers in America, is because of just that he was an up-and-comer in the world, and he was also a complete murderer, a completely demented and twisted murderer, and the whole concept of you never know who a serial killer is going to be. But there is something that does set Ted Bundy apart from other serial killers, and that is that his prosperity, his appearance, he has an extremely symmetrical face, and other serial killers will more or less try and develop a bland personality and hide in the shadows. Or, again, maybe hide in the shadows isn't the exact word. They have a bland personality, and they just come off as so mild-mannered and non-threatening that nobody thinks twice about them. An example of this might have been Roger Kibbe, the I-5 Strangler, and even to a certain extent, BTK Dennis Rader, although he had his moments when he definitely let it out that he was a dangerous person, but he said that, by his own admission, that he was very good at going between the different types of behavior that one needed to use to blend in with society. And I think that that is definitely true, not only for him, but with Ted Bundy, it's more about just being charming, being well-spoken, just sitting around and having a laugh with people, and then going out in the dark and committing these horrible, horrible crimes. And this is somebody, Ted Bundy, who's going out with what looked like a burglary kit. He was arrested for suspicion of burglary multiple times, but it's his kill kit. I mean, it's deliberate, it's composed, it's calculated. And I think that it all goes back to this concept of having this twisted obsession with women, having sexual desires that he wants to act on that began in his mind as some type of bizarre imaginative sequences that he decided to act out, and then he could act them out and not get caught, so then he's just keeps going and going until he gets caught. But he is also someone who just did not want to be contained. And this can be found in the dark triad personality traits, or dark triad personality traits: narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. I've talked a lot about psychopathy in this episode, so to focus on Machiavellianism, I learned about this phrasing from Dr. Todd Grande, that a Machiavellian personality in the dark triad sense would be someone who thinks that they are so intelligent and superior to other people that they don't have to follow the laws of society. They can weave their own way around them. Ted Bundy is somebody who escaped from prison multiple times and then just went on to keep committing these types of crimes. Absolutely, I think that he is someone who would fall into the Machiavellian category. But in the interview with Dr. Hal Carlisle, they asked a very interesting challenge question, and I'll just preface this by saying that we've talked a lot about horrible things involving murder and torture, so here's a lighter challenge question, and they use this to conclude the episode. Once again, that is the Serial Killer Podcast, Episode 4, which is done with Al Carlisle, who wrote the book Violent Mind about Ted Bundy, and he has one follow-up book. But the challenge question is, what is one movie or book about a fictional serial killer that you either liked or you would recommend? And the first one I thought of was the one that actually came up in the discussion, and that is American Psycho, written by Bret Easton Ellis, and then it was made into the movie with Christian Bale. And there are so many elements of Ted Bundy in American Psycho. Of course, Christian Bale is playing the fictional serial killer Patrick Bateman, and he's the vice president of a company, and he is not exactly working the same political life that Ted Bundy was, or the law school and such. However, the whole concept of being the well-dressed, well-spoken man, nobody is paying attention, so then he can get away with these crimes, learning how to sort of weave around other people's mental blocks and barriers. And I read this once in a review of American Psycho, and it was actually a joint review of American Psycho and American Psycho 2. And this is not the most scholarly response, but it said that the reason why people like the movie American Psycho is because the killer, Patrick Bateman, played by Christian Bale, didn't so much enjoy killing as he did pondering the meaning that was lost by this person's absence, like the meaning that is lost from life now that this person is no longer alive. And I think that is very fitting to Ted Bundy. And I'll say one thing about that in a second, but I do want to be clear that Bret Easton Ellis said that a lot of the source material for American Psycho actually came from the serial killer Paul Bernardo, who was known as the Scarborough Rapist, and he went on to become one half of the Ken and Barbie killers. The other half was Karla Homolka. Paul Bernardo actually had something very similar happen to him as to Bundy, and that was that he learned that his life was a lie as well. His parents had lied to him about having him as their biological child, or lying isn't the right word. They were raising him to be their biological child, as their biological child, and he didn't learn until his teen years that he was adopted, and he viewed that as a betrayal. Ted Bundy's case is a little bit more extreme, but in regards to the way that Ted Bundy operated, I also heard this line from Thomas Thune that Ted Bundy made a statement that he liked to look into the eyes of the victim as they were passing away, and at that moment he felt like God. So does that not show you that it's all about power, it's all about domination, and who does he want to dominate? Women. He wants to have control over women because of perhaps the issues that happened with his mother, perhaps about not even having a clear mother figure to turn to, that whole shattering of the pillars of childhood. And also there are stories about how Ted Bundy's grandfather beat him severely, and that he didn't have a parental figure to intervene in that, and maybe he expected that his mother would have been supposed to have been the person to protect him from that, or she should have been the person to protect him from that. I can only guess on that, and anybody can guess on that. Ted Bundy was captured, and we don't know how many murders he actually committed. They estimate that it's in the 30s, but Ted Bundy, by his own admission, said that it's in the triple digits, meaning that he murdered more than 100 people. I mean, I don't have any idea if that's true or not. I'm thinking probably not, but perhaps he murdered other people in addition to the crimes that they know about. But there is a dramatization in the movie Ted Bundy, again called that, just that, Ted Bundy, that shows what it looks like when someone is executed. And they went through extraordinarily graphic things in that film, showing how a person will be prepped for the electric chair. And I mean, I'm not even going to share some of the details, but it's very much intense. And there's also one thing that I will share from the movie Ted Bundy, and that is that Ted Bundy's making a call prior to his execution, and he's panicking and he's freaking out, and he's just like, I want to say that he's either talking to a governor or someone in law enforcement and saying, okay, they tell me that I'm incapable of experiencing human empathy, but I can help you catch other criminals, I can help you solve crimes. And that just goes to show that he did have feelings, and he did have the ability to process his own feelings, but when it would, in terms of empathy toward other people, I think that was mostly non-existent. Although Al Carlisle did say that he had a certain sense of guilt when he murdered a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly, but he did not show remorse for it. It's just he felt guilty for crossing a line in his own sort of twisted mind that he shouldn't have, meanings that his animosity is toward women, not toward somebody that young. Again, though I don't have any comment on that, that is a statement from Al Carlisle. I'm not exactly sure what to make of that at this point, but anybody can respond in the comment section down below. You can also respond to that challenge question: what is a good movie about a fictional serial killer, or book two about a fictional serial killer? And it's hard to think of ones that are actually based purely on fictional serial killers, because I don't know if I would call these good movies, but there are two that I watched last year when I was looking at things involving BTK, and they're called The Clovitch Killer and A Good Marriage. Again, they're based on Dennis Rader, BTK, but they're not told through his story. For example, the Clovitch Killer is played by Dylan McDermott, and he's a very similar killer. And in A Good Marriage, the killer's played by Anthony LaPaglia. And the reason why I like these movies is because I talk about true crime cases here on Black Box Online Radio, and you can see the different elements of true crime psychology playing out. And the Clovitch Killer is what would happen if a son learned that his father was the serial killer. And in A Good Marriage, it's what would happen if the wife learned that her husband was the serial killer. So I just think that some of those elements have been explored a little bit here on BBOR. And again, I have an episode about that that's just talking about BTK, Dennis Rader on film. And as far as episodes in the past, in 2019, I did 2 episodes about Ted Bundy here on Black Box Online Radio, and I've been pulling from some of that material as far as sources for the show. One of them is called Ted Bundy Nationwide Homicide, and the other one is called Ted Bundy The Stranger. The Stranger, of course, was referring to Ann Rule's The Stranger Beside Me, the movie version. I did like a movie response as opposed to a traditional film review here on BBOR. And I would like to just throw in another introduction on an unrelated point. If you have been following along with this show, I'm the author of the book Killer on a White Horse, A Story of the Evening Watchman. It is a novel, and yesterday I started the first chapter in that book, Killer on a White Horse, for the second part, and there'll be, it's not going to be called part 2, there will be a different title, but it's a continuation of the same story, and if you're curious about murder mysteries and things that explore true crime psychology in a fictitious form, then I would invite you to check that one out. But I also want to share something with you guys, and that is that Ted Bundy is an alternative suspect in the disappearance of Donna Lass from 1970. Donna Lass disappeared on September 6 of 1970 while she was working the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift in the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino. She is thought to have been abducted and murdered by the Zodiac Killer, but actually 2 years ago on the channel I did an episode called Donna Lass, Possible Ted Bundy Victim, and that's just saying that Ted Bundy would have been a more likely candidate to have abducted and murdered Donna Lass than the Zodiac Killer. She would fit his victim profile much more so than the Zodiac. The Zodiac Killer never once targeted a lone female. That's something to remember in the confirmed crimes anyway. And also that this whole thing about having the broken arm, the cast on his arm, oh, I need help with this, can you just come help me real fast, and then abducting and murdering her. Okay, I mean, it's a far-out wild theory, and I don't personally support it, but I do explore that in an episode here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. But what do you think about any of the elements that have been discussed in this episode about how I've stated that Ted Bundy was somebody who was bullied, alienated, and at certain times even beaten by his grandfather, partnered with the dark family secret, partnered with the obsession with pornography, partnered with the ability to manipulate and deceive people, and in that Machiavellian way weaving around the pillars of society, then all of that stuff leads him to become a sexually motivated serial killer because he can commit these vicious acts toward people, fuel his own excitement, not show empathy for the victims, and get away with it, and that allowed him to do things over and over again. And things like the sorority house massacre, trying to commit crimes, leaving an enormous amount of destruction in humanity's wake, and then just going on and doing it again because he had the power to do so, because he had the ability to dominate, because he had the ability to persuade, because he had the ability to always find a way out, and he thought that he was superior to everyone and just did not care about other people in the neurological sense. I mean, we're talking about the way that neurotransmitters function and such, and again, he is a psychopathic murderer, but not someone who is using torture as the pure means of killing people. And what do you think about the comparisons that I've made with Ted Bundy and some of these other murderers discussed in this show? Joel Rifkin, Richard Speck, Albert Fish, Paul Bernardo, John Wayne Gacy, and Jeffrey Dahmer. If you have anything to share about serial killers, you can put your idea in the comments section down below. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.